myself.
My Lords, the quality of a debate is determined by those who participate, and no one could have hoped for a better informed or knowledgeable or wise or humanity-related debate than the one we've had this afternoon. Baroness Smith of Basildon said that it underlines the purpose of your Lordship's House to be able to conduct debates of this kind, and I entirely agree with her. No one will have been surprised by the passion and the vigour with which the Noble Lord, Lord Ahmed of Wimbledon, has responded to us today. The Noble Lord is a great example of how to conduct yourself as a minister, and I hope that that was not a valedictory statement that he was making to us in his closing remarks, because I hope he will go on being a minister at the dispatch box in your Lordship's House for a long time to come. But he's also a deeply committed parliamentarian, and whether it's insights that he communicates, as he did in the recent Forbes conference, the insights from his mother, or today through his father to some of the Urdu poets, I hope we'll go on hearing those insights for a long time to come as well. We first met when I was in another place, and a group of people came with the young Tariq Ahmed to persuade members of Parliament to take up the persecution of his Ahmadi community seriously. Happily, I responded positively and said I would write to ministers, and did. Years later, he teasingly said to me, "Now you're getting your own back, because barely a day passes when I don't receive representations from you." It was a great privilege during the recent Forbes conference to chair one of the side events on the plight of the Ahmadi community. My Lords, in a way that underlines what the Noble Baroness Smith of Basildon said to us about our interdependence and how we are determined one against another all the time. Wasn't it Nelson Mandela who said a person is a person because of other people? We are coexistent on this planet. We must learn to respect one another and to live alongside one another. And in that sense, I agree with the Noble Lord, Lord Hannam, in what he said about the dangers of self-sufficiency, but the Noble Lord, Lord Cormac, was right as well to say that in times of war and conflict, that is not the only issue. The Noble Baroness Lady Smith of Newnham rightly said in her excellent speech that we suffer from a sort of attention deficit if we're not careful, and could have compassion fatigue. And she talked about the inadequacy of our response, a drop in the ocean. Noble Lord, Lord Purvis talked about the need to live up and to honour our commitments to the 0.7% spending target, a point made by a number of your Lordships during the debate. Back in 1970, as a student, I made my first speech in the Student Union on the subject of the General Assembly resolution on 0.7%. And it was the Noble Lord, Lord Purvis who did so much to ensure that that was enshrined in statute. My Lords, it is a terrible tragedy, and the Noble to have reduced that funding, and the Right Reverend Prelate, the Bishop of St Albans, was right to remind us that it's not just about generosity and altruism. It is also about self-interest to ensure that we retain those target figures and do what we can to alleviate the suffering of the poorest in our world today. In his excellent maiden speech, the Right Reverend Prelate, the Bishop of Sutherland, Nottingham, reminded us of the connections between his diocese and the Salvation Army. But he specifically talked about Uganda and his links with that part of Africa and the impact of the crisis on the life chances of young people. And all of us will look forward to hearing many more speeches from him in the future. The Noble Lord Risby, in an excellent speech, reminded us about the dangers of this spreading through instability into many places, including Egypt, which he knows a great deal about, and the impact of migration flows. The Noble Lord, my noble friend Lord Hastings, talked about waste. The Noble Baroness Lady Bennet quite rightly told us that this is a crisis with a long history, and we've done far too little thinking in developing how we see the role of food, how we avert crises of this kind from recurring. My noble friend, the Earl of Sandwich, took us to Sudan, and Noble Lord Polak took us to Somaliland. I have great admiration for my noble friend and for the Noble Lord Polak. I served with the Noble Earl on the all-party group for Sudan. I visited Darfur. 300,000 people died there during the genocide. 2 million people were displaced. My Lords, this is happening all over again, and we must do more than we are doing to avert it. Let me end with what the Noble Lord Purvis said to us about the moral opposite of being the moral opposite of what Putin represents. We must do better than we have. Our values are the values that matter in this world, but they don't come cheaply. They come at a price, and we're seeing that price, whether it's in loss of human life or indeed in treasure. It comes at a price, and we must be willing to pay that price, not least because of the kind of stories we heard from Lord Polak, the story of Dahlia in Somaliland. I read this story in the Washington Post recently, the story of a little child in neighbouring Somalia, one of the early victims of the current crisis, 2-month-old Muad Abidi. He died after a night of diarrhoea and vomiting in a sprawling camp on the outskirts of Mogadishu. The newspaper reported that his eyes turned up, and I felt he was no longer with me. That was his mother. His older brother, 2-year-old, was fighting an infection in a crowded hospital. His defences weakened by the kind of severe malnutrition that the noble Lord Purvis described. His 1-year-old sister, Habiba, slumped limply on her mother's hip. Until a month previously, the mother said, the $1 to $2 a day her husband earned from occasional construction work bought 2 meals of rice and beans for the family of 6. Now that money is barely enough for 1 daily meal of rice, and the situation has been exacerbated because of the crisis in Ukraine. My lords, we owe it to families like these to do more than we have, and I know it's the united view of your Lordship's House that we must do that. I'm grateful to all noble lords who have participated.
The question is,